The rain showed no mercy that night. It fell in hard, unrelenting sheets that turned the dirt paths into rivers of mud and made the trees sway like they might snap in two. Alara stumbled along the edge of the forest, her boots squelching, her thin coat clinging to her skin as if it were trying to remind her how little protection it offered. Her hair stuck to her face, plastered across her eyes, and every breath felt like swallowing knives. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The gnawing in her stomach had grown so sharp it was no longer hunger but a hollow pain that stretched into her bones. She wanted to collapse, to let the storm carry her away, but something inside, some tiny, stubborn ember, kept her moving forward. Once, not so long ago, she had known warmth. She could remember sitting at her father's table, the scent of fresh bread and stew filling their small home, laughter weaving through the cracks of the walls. But sickness had claimed him quickly, and with his passing came debts she hadn't even known existed. Men came to the door with sharp voices and sharper demands. Soon the house was gone, the little life she'd known stripped from her hands piece by piece. She tried working, tried begging, tried simply surviving, but the city was merciless. Hunger became her only constant companion. Now, soaked and trembling, she lifted her eyes and saw it, a faint glow in the distance. A cabin, light spilling from the window like a fragile promise. She wanted to believe it was real, not a cruel trick of her starving mind. Her legs carried her forward in uneven strides, each step threatening to give way beneath her. She reached the door and raised her hand, but her knock was so faint, she feared it would go unheard. Inside, Lucas sat by the fire. The crackling flames were his only company, their warmth unable to chase the cold that lived inside his chest. His hands were calloused, his body marked with scars that told stories he never wished to repeat. Once, he had been a soldier. Once, he had stood tall with comrades who laughed around campfires and spoke of futures that never came. He had buried too many of them, seen too much cruelty carried out by men who called themselves leaders. And when it was over, when peace returned, he found no peace within himself. So he walked away from it all, finding solitude in this cabin at the forest's edge. When the knock came, faint and hesitant, his first instinct was to ignore it. Strangers brought danger, strangers carried desperation, and he had vowed to keep the world at arm's length. But something about the sound, it was not the confident knock of a man demanding entry, nor the heavy pounding of someone with power. It was fragile, weak, a whisper of survival. Against his better judgment, Lucas rose, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor as he reached for the latch and pulled the door open. She stood there, rain-soaked and trembling, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm howled behind her, pushing at her back as though to shove her inside. Finally, her lips parted, voice shaking as she forced the words out. I have nothing left," she whispered. "No food, no money, but if you'll let me stay, if you'll give me warmth, I'll give you, my body." The words fell like stones between them. Lucas's jaw clenched, his chest tightening as memories clawed their way up. He had seen women whisper those same words to men in uniform, desperate to save their children or themselves. He had hated those men, the way they took, the way they left women hollow. And now here she was, offering herself not out of desire, but as if she were bargaining away the last shred of her dignity just to survive another night. "No," he said firmly, the word sharp enough to make her flinch. Her eyes widened, and she swayed, believing he had rejected her entirely, that she had gambled the last thing she had and still lost. Her knees buckled, her body crumpling toward the ground. Before she could fall, his arms caught her. They were strong, steady, carrying none of the hunger she feared. He lifted her easily, guiding her past the threshold. Instead of dragging her toward a bed, he led her to the hearth, where the fire glowed warm and steady. He lowered her into a chair, draping a thick wool blanket around her shoulders. "You don't have to trade yourself to survive," he said quietly, his voice gruff but steady. "Not here, not with me." Her lips trembled, tears spilling before she could stop them. She wanted to tell him he didn't understand, that out there, people didn't give kindness for free. Out there, survival meant giving away pieces of yourself until nothing was left. But the fire's warmth seeped into her, the blanket softened the chill, and the way he looked at her, not with desire, but with something closer to sorrow, broke down the walls she had built. For the first time in months, she felt safe enough to cry. Lucas turned away, giving her the dignity of privacy as she sobbed quietly, the storm outside masking her sounds. He busied himself with a pot over the fire, ladling stew into a bowl. It wasn't much, just vegetables and scraps of meat, but to her, it smelled like a feast. When he set it before her, her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. She ate hungrily, each bite filling not just her stomach but a hollow part of her soul. He sat across from her, silent, watching with a steady gaze that held no judgment. When the bowl was empty, she lowered her head, shame prickling at her skin. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" His voice was calm, though his eyes stayed fixed on hers. "For what I said. For offering myself like that." Lucas's expression softened. He leaned back in his chair, the firelight flickering across the lines of his face. "You did what you thought you had to. Desperation makes us believe we are worth only what we can give away. But you're more than that. Don't apologize for surviving." The words struck deep, stirring something inside her she had nearly forgotten, dignity, fragile but not destroyed. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, silent tears slipping down her cheeks, though now they carried not just sorrow, but the faintest spark of relief. That night, the storm raged on, thunder rolling over the cabin like a warning. But inside, there was warmth. Lucas gave her the bed, layering quilts over her small frame. She tried to protest, weakly, but he silenced her with a simple shake of his head. "Rest," he said. "You need it more than I do." She lay in the bed, the softness unfamiliar, her body too weary to resist. For a moment, panic threatened to rise, fearing he would join her, demand what she had offered. But he didn't. He sat by the fire instead, the orange glow painting his silhouette in quiet strength. She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally pulling her under, and for the first time in a long time, she dreamed not of hunger or fear, but of warmth. Lucas sat awake long into the night, staring into the flames. He couldn't shake the image of her at the door, her voice cracking with desperation. He thought of the ghosts that haunted him, of the people he couldn't save. And he realized, perhaps for the first time in years, that saving someone else might just be the only way to start saving himself. The first light of dawn crept across the cabin floor, pale and uncertain, painting everything in shades of gold and gray. Alara stirred beneath the heavy quilts, the warmth cocooning her in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. For a moment, in that fragile space between sleep and waking, she believed she was back in her old home, her father humming softly in the kitchen, the smell of bread in the air. But then reality returned, the faint ache in her stomach, the soreness in her limbs, the unfamiliar ceiling above her. She blinked and sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders as if afraid it might be taken away at any moment. The fire had died down to glowing embers, but the cabin was not empty. She heard the dull thud of an axe outside, rhythmic and steady. She rose, her legs weak but stronger than they had been the night before, and crossed to the small window. There, she saw him, Lucas. He stood tall, his shirt damp with sweat despite the morning chill, his arms moving with practiced precision as he split wood. His movements carried no hesitation, no wasted energy, only the quiet discipline of a man who had learned to survive through habit and repetition. For a long time, she just watched him, her thoughts tangled. She could not understand why he had helped her. In her world, kindness always came at a price, often crueler than the hardship itself. Yet he had asked for nothing, had turned down what she had thought was her only means of bargaining. It unsettled her as much as it comforted her. When she finally stepped outside, the cool air nipped at her cheeks. Lucas looked up briefly, his expression unreadable, before setting another log on the chopping block. "Bread's on the table," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. She hesitated, then glanced back into the cabin where, sure enough, a plate sat waiting with a thick slice of bread and a small pot of honey. Her stomach twisted with longing, but still she lingered. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice barely rising above the rustle of the wind. He set the axe down, the blade sinking into the block with a dull thud. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the trees as though they held the answer. Then he turned to her, his gaze steady, almost heavy. "Because once, someone saved me when I thought I was nothing," he said quietly. "And it wasn't with a bargain. It was with mercy. I owe that debt forward." His words lingered in the air, wrapping around her like the blanket she still clutched. She didn't know what to say. Gratitude clawed at her throat, but so did disbelief. Could kindness truly exist without cost? She looked at him, at the lines carved into his face, the scars that mapped his skin, and realized this was not a man who spoke lightly. Whatever ghosts haunted him, They had carved out a piece of his soul, and yet he chose to give instead of take. Over the next few days, Alara remained in the cabin. At first, it was simply because her body demanded rest. She slept long hours, waking only when Lucas placed food before her. But gradually, as the weakness eased, she found herself helping with small tasks. She swept the floor, though it hardly needed it. She mended a tear in one of his shirts with clumsy stitches, her fingers shaking from lack of practice. She carried logs from the pile outside, though they were heavier than she expected, leaving her arms sore and trembling. Lucas never asked these things of her, but he never stopped her either. He only watched quietly, sometimes offering a nod, sometimes a faint, almost imperceptible curve of his lips that might have been a smile. They spoke little, at first. Words seemed unnecessary in the quiet rhythm of survival. Yet slowly, the silence softened. One evening, as she struggled with the woodpile, she let out a sharp laugh at her own clumsiness, the sound surprising even her. Lucas paused, axe in hand, and for a brief moment, his stern expression eased, and his eyes warmed. She caught it, that fleeting glimpse of something lighter beneath his hardened shell, and it made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. But there were nights, too, when sorrow gripped her without warning. Sometimes she would sit by the fire and think of her father, of the life that had been stolen, of the shame she had felt when she offered herself in desperation. Tears would slip down her face, silent and unbidden. She thought she was hiding them, but Lucas always noticed. He never asked why, never demanded explanations, but somehow his silence gave her more comfort than words could have. He let her feel, let her break, and in that quiet allowance, she found space to begin mending. It was on one of those evenings, the sky painted in ribbons of pink and gold, that she finally spoke what weighed heaviest on her heart. She sat near the hearth, the flames dancing in her eyes, and whispered, "I thought I had nothing left. That the only thing I could give was my body. But you made me see, I still have myself. My dignity, my future. Thank you." Lucas looked at her across the fire, his hands resting on his knees. His chest tightened, his throat thick with words he could not bring himself to say. She thought she had gained from him, but the truth was, she had given him something just as valuable. Her presence had stirred life back into his quiet cabin, reminded him of a world beyond ghosts and regrets. He wanted to tell her this, to let her know that she had awakened something in him he thought long dead. But instead, he said only, "You never owed me anything. Just promise me this, never again believe you are worth only what others can take from you." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she simply let the firelight reflect in her tears, silent acknowledgement of the vow she was making not just to him, but to herself. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew, not through desperation or bargains, but through trust. They shared meals, shared work, shared silences that no longer felt heavy but comfortable. The world outside was still harsh, still waiting to test them, but within the walls of the cabin, a fragile peace blossomed. She found herself laughing more often, her body growing stronger, her spirit slowly uncoiling from the tight knot it had been bound into. And Lucas, though he rarely said much, felt the weight inside him ease bit by bit, as if her presence had shifted something he had long believed immovable. The shocking truth was not what she had offered him on that stormy night, but what he had offered her instead. He gave her respect when she thought she had none, kindness when she believed the world had run out, and the chance to believe that survival did not mean surrendering her soul. And in giving that to her, he rediscovered pieces of his own humanity he thought he had buried forever. Their story did not begin with love, nor with desire, but with mercy. And from that mercy, something far stronger grew, a bond that neither had expected, but both came to cherish.